Hey everyone, I'm Johnny, and today we're taking a look at an Australian World War II film, Kokoda from 2006, which focuses on the Kokota track campaign, a significant yet underappreciated event in the Pacific theater. The Kokota track campaign of 1942 was one of the first Allied victories in the Pacific to halt Japanese expansion. It was hard won by the Australians. Kokota focuses on one of the small infantry sections that fought on the Kokota track, in what was then the Australian territory of Papua.
10,000 Japanese make their way up the narrow trail from Kokota toward us. We are alone.
Kokota had a small budget for filming. It's less a story of the campaign and more an intimate telling of the trials of one lost patrol surviving in the jungles of New Guinea while engaging in small skirmishes with Japanese forces. Kokoda's lack of budget was a strength, as the director chose to focus on the squad-level experience, facing the harshness of jungle warfare. There are no big-budget engagements here, just the tension of the jungle, where the enemy can be almost anywhere. In 1942, after the fall of Singapore, Australia lost nearly an entire division of men, and the bulk of the Australian Imperial Force, known as the AIF, were fighting in North Africa. Australia was ill-prepared for the Japanese advance into New Guinea, with the only forces immediately available to defend the island, conscripts and militiamen, known as Chacos, a nickname they were given, as they were not trained or equipped for direct combat, but rather support roles. It was believed these men would melt away like chocolate in the heat of the battle. In June of 1942, the Chacos of the 39th Battalion would have to hold off a Japanese force, outnumbering them 10-1, working their way to Port Moresby, a gateway to northern Australia, only 160 kilometers away. The 39th Australian Battalion would also be supported by the Papuan Infantry Battalion, or PIB. Together, the defense force would be known as the Maroubra Force. Further support came from Papuans, who carried supplies, and the wounded, known by the Australians as the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels.
Jack. Where are you going, Jack? Kokoda's that way.
Kokota focuses on a small group of these poorly trained, under-equipped men defending the Kokota track to Port Moresby, including the torturous Owen Stanley Range. Much of the film focuses on the horrendous conditions of the jungle, with the men fighting dysentery, mosquitoes, disease, and foot rot. The Japanese forces almost taking a backseat to the jungle as the antagonists of the film. The movie, though not directly based on any real-life figures, has a strong attention to detail, believable characters, tactics, and an atmosphere close to the real event. The story takes some inspiration from a forward patrol that was cut off during the Battle of Isarava. The cut-off men fought through the jungle with no food, battling disease and transporting wounded men. They would eventually rejoin the 39th Battalion, as they were about to be overrun, and rejoin the battle in a state that could only be described as half alive. The Battle of Isarava was fought in August of 1942. The dogged Australian defense delayed the Japanese by 4 days, and they took heavy losses. Some reports indicate the Australians killed 550 of the enemy on August 29th alone. Though this battle was brief, it was considered the tipping point for the equally exhausted and supply-stretched Japanese. The Japanese would eventually retreat, just 65 kilometers from Port Moresby. The battles fought during the Kokota track campaign were of grit. Which army could starve, endure the terrain, the weather, the disease, and the relentless ambush tactics each side employed against one another? In the end, the Australian Chacos of the 39th Battalion did not melt, and along with the 2nd Australian Imperial Force and Papuan Infantry, out-endure the Japanese. Watch Kokota to learn the day-to-day suffering of the average soldier during campaigns like the Kokota track. Bloody or heroic battles make for good cinema, but Kokota makes for a refreshing dose of reality, for what war really looks like. Fighting flies, finding toilet paper, or even just trying to stay dry for never-ending weeks.
Feels like me guts are coming out of me bum.
Alright, I'm Johnny. Thanks for watching this overview of Kokota. It's a movie I highly recommend if you're wanting a bit less action intense, but more real and gritty.